Click here to subscribe our channel. Do not forget to press bell icon to get regular updates of free videos.
Okay, continue with this growth and development. Within growth and development, the important model is a Solow model. There are many questions from Solow model, like what is the meaning of steady state, golden rule steady state, transition path. So among various models like Harrod-Domar model, Solow model, or Lewis model, or Harris-Todaro model, most frequently asked question is from Solow model. The main idea of Solow model is that, first of all, explain that different models are trying to explain growth and development. So the growth of economy depends upon certain factors. Some factors are highlighted by different models. So if I say that growth of economy is a function of, now growth means growth of GDP. GDP you are plotting by symbol Y. So if you write simply Y, remember this Y is nothing but gross domestic product. Now if I say that Y is a function of, if it is a function of stock of capital, it is a function of labor force, it is a function of technology, it is a function of raw material, it is a function of labor efficiency. So production is a function of stock of capital, stock of labor. Function could be expressed in this form also. If function is A capital to the power alpha, labor to the power 1 minus alpha. So if I say GDP is a function of capital, it is a function of labor, it is a function of technology. Technology is represented by A here. So if you say that there is a growth in the economy of 7.2%, GDP growth rate of India is say 7.2%. So that GDP growth must be due to growth in which factor? If GDP is a function of these factors, so GDP growth will depend upon growth of technology. GDP growth will depend upon growth of capital stock. GDP growth will depend upon growth of labor force. There may be other factors, but to explain in a model form, we are highlighting three important factors. So Solow model is basically designed in such a way that it explains how interaction of technology, capital stock and labor force determine growth of GDP. There could be other factors, but we are focusing on three factors. One factor is technological change, other factor is a capital stock, and third factor is labor force. So GDP is a function of technology, it is a function of stock of capital, and it is also a function of labor force. So if technology will grow, GDP will grow. If stock of capital will grow, then also GDP will grow. If labor force will increase due to population, then also GDP will increase. So GDP growth is a function of technical growth rate, it is a function of capital stock growth rate, which you will simply call it capital accumulation. Increase in stock of capital is capital accumulation, and put it simply, it is nothing but investment. So increase in stock of capital is nothing but investment part, and increase in labor force you can relate it with population growth rate. So Solow model is simply saying that GDP is a function of technology, capital stock and labor force, and therefore GDP growth rate will be a function of growth rate of technology, growth rate of capital stock and growth rate of labor force. So you have to start with this part. Now there are various steps in which Solow model will be built. all factors are not variable in the first step. In the first step, I will consider technology constant, labor force constant. So if technology is constant as well as labor force is constant, then GDP will change only due to capital stock. So if you consider technology fixed and labor force fixed, then GDP will change only because of change in capital accumulation. That will be your step number 1. In step number 2, you will change labor force also. So then GDP will change either due to change in capital or due to change in labor. In the third step, even technology will become variable. So then GDP will change due to change in technology or change in capital or due to change in labor or due to change in all factors together. So we have to explain this model. After that, what is the concept of steady state, what is long run equilibrium of the economy, what is golden rule steady state, what is transition path within the steady state. So first paragraph is giving you the main idea of that Solow model. What is the main idea? So if any question related to Solow model, you can begin with that paragraph, and that paragraph basically gives you the main idea behind the Solow model. So what is the main idea behind the Solow model? Solow model is designed to explain what? Solow model is designed to explain how technology, capital stock and labor force interact and how their interaction determine GDP. So Solow model is basically designed to explain how technology, capital stock and labor force interact and how their interaction determine economy's GDP and the growth rate of that GDP. So write down that first paragraph. Solow model is designed to show how growth in capital stock Solow model is designed to show how growth in capital stock, growth in labor force and advances in technology interact in an economy and how they affect total output of goods and service of an economy full stop. It is based on law of diminishing return. To individual factor of production. Law of diminishing return to individual factor of production. Underline that. Law of diminishing return. Solow model is based upon diminishing return. And what does that mean? Law of diminishing return to individual factor means that keeping technology and labor constant, if you increase only capital, then output will increase at decreasing rate. Similarly, if you keep technology and capital constant and increase only labor, then also output will increase at decreasing rate. So Solow model is based upon law of diminishing return. Next paragraph. Capital and labor work together. to produce output. Capital and labor work together to produce output. If there is abundant capital, then marginal productivity of capital will be less. If there is abundant capital, then marginal productivity of capital will be less. If there is abundant capital, then marginal productivity of capital will be less. Similarly, if there is abundant labor, then marginal productivity of labor will be less. If there is abundant labor, then marginal productivity of labor will be less. Marginal productivity of labor will be less. It basically implies that the factor which is abundant will have a lower marginal productivity. Abundant in the sense, if you keep labor and technology constant and increase only capital, then capital will become abundant. So if capital is abundant, then marginal productivity of capital will be lower. If labor is abundant, then marginal productivity of labor will be less. So the factor which is abundant will have lower marginal productivity. Continue.
Abundant meaning
in comparison to that, relative term है ये. If you keep labor constant and increase only capital, then capital will become abundant. If you keep capital constant and increase only labor, then labor will become abundant relative to the other factor of production. This implies that in Solow model, capital output ratio is endogenous. Capital output ratio is endogenous. Capital output ratio symbolically theta से denote किया उसको. Capital output ratio is endogenous. Underline that. Capital output ratio is endogenous. It means that value of theta, that is capital output ratio, it means that the value of theta depends on relative endowment of capital and labor. Relative endowment of capital and labor. Relative endowment of capital and labor. Just when you explain this capital output ratio, if I plot here capital and here output as a function of capital keeping labor constant हो गया, y as a function of capital keeping labor constant. Now this can be interpreted as per unit output also. So in order to convert or make it into per unit, you can divide this output by labor. So it will become output divided by labor per unit. GDP को अपने पॉपुलेशन से डिवाइड कर दिया तो GDP पर कैपिटा हो गया वो. वैसे कैपिटल को अगर मैं पॉपुलेशन से डिवाइड कर दूं तो कैपिटल पर कैपिटा हो गया. सो y एज अ फंक्शन ऑफ k है एक्चुअल में, एंड ड्यू टू डिमिनिशिंग रिटर्न its slope will keep on declining. If there will be constant return, the line will be straight. If there will be increasing return, slope will increase. But Solow model is based upon diminishing return. Now since Solow model is based upon diminishing return, therefore you plot this. Now relate करना है यहाँ से. If I say stock of capital K upon L, से मैंने small k से denote कर दिया. That means if I say small k, it is capital K upon L. Suppose stock of capital in India in 1991 is this value. Then corresponding to that stock of capital, there will be a specific output. Output को मैंने y से denote कर दिया, और जहाँ small y लिखा है वो capital Y upon L है. So there will be an output in the year 1991. ठीक है. Now if you connect this point with origin, what the slope of this line measures? आपने इस पॉइंट को ओरिजिन से कनेक्ट कर दिया और इस लाइन का स्लोप अगर कैलकुलेट कर रहे हैं, स्लोप ऑफ द लाइन विच स्टार्ट फ्रॉम ओरिजिन, देन इट विल बिकम स्लोप ऑफ इज नथिंग बट परपेंडिकुलर बाय बेस. सो परपेंडिकुलर इज दिस एंड बेस इज दिस. सो इट इज स्लोप ऑफ दैट लाइन इज नथिंग बट y बाई k हो गया, y बाई k. बट ध्यान देना, व्हाट इज कैपिटल आउटपुट रेशियो? थीटा को क्या बोला है? वो कैपिटल और आउटपुट का रेशियो है. तो जब आप स्लोप मेजर कर रहे हैं तो वो आ जाएगा y बाई k. सो इट कुड बी रिटन एज स्लोप इज नथिंग बट 1 अपॉन थीटा लिख सकते हैं, इनवर्स है उसका. नाउ इफ आई से स्टॉक ऑफ कैपिटल in India in 2018 is this value. So in 2018 the GDP of economy per capita will also be higher. Now if you join this point with origin, slope क्या हो रहा है? इंक्रीज हुआ डिक्रीज हुआ? जो लाइन आपने यहाँ ड्रॉ कर रखी है, that line gets flatter. It means slope decreases, but slope is 1 upon theta. So what about the value of theta? It increases. So if slope is declining, it means the value of theta is increasing. Slope is declining, it means the value of theta is increasing. So if I say that the value of theta in 1991 is 4:1, then the value of theta in 2018 will be what? Higher है तो more than 4 हो जाएगा. अब more than 4, if I say 6:1, what is the interpretation of this number? इस नंबर का इंटरप्रिटेशन क्या है? In 1991 you require 4 capital to produce 1 output. In 2008 you require 6 capital to produce same output. But why you require more capital to produce same output? Because productivity of capital has reduced. And why productivity of capital has reduced? Because capital is now more abundant. So the factor which will be abundant will be having lower productivity. So the value of theta does not remain constant as it was assumed in the Harrod-Dommer model. So Harrod-Dommer model basically assumed that the value of theta remains same in the t period as well as t plus 1 period. But Solow model say that the value of theta is endogenous. So when you say it is endogenous, it means what? Its value will change during the growth process. So during this growth process, the value of theta will change. So as economy accumulate more and more of capital, productivity of that capital decreases and therefore you require more capital to produce same unit of output. So due to that diminishing return, economy require more capital to produce same unit of output. So remember, in this Solow model, which is based upon diminishing return, the value of capital output ratio is endogenous, it is not exogenous. So endogeneity is being considered. The value of theta is not fixed here. रफ में ये डायग्राम ड्रॉ कर लीजिए. This in paper it is not necessary to write a year. If you can write 1991 2018 or just write K1 or K2, Y1 and Y2. ठीक है, add into that one. As stock of capital increases, as stock of capital increases, as stock of capital increases, the value of theta will also increase. As stock of capital increases, the value of theta will also increase, implying that economy require more capital, unit to produce more capital unit to produce 1 unit of output. More capital unit to produce 1 unit of output. Full stop. Diminishing return to capital is the main difference between Solow model and Harrod-Domer model. Between Solow model and Harrod-Domer model. Underline that line. Diminishing return to capital is the main difference between Solow model and Harrod-Domer model. Next paragraph. According to Harrod-Domer model, increase in saving rate resulted into continuous growth, because capital output ratio is constant. But in Solow model, increase in saving rate will have no long run effect, because value of capital output ratio is endogenous. Now to explain this last paragraph, basically you have to explain the model first. So first of all, explain the Solow model, its basic form. So the basic model, description of that model now. Okay, we are explaining that Solow model, the basic part, and when if some question relates to, remember that Solow model is also referred as neoclassical model. So if the word Solow is not used, if it says neoclassical model, then also you have to explain the Solow model. So Solow model is basically an example of neoclassical model. To explain that model, you will have two different sides. One is supply side and other will be the demand side. That is supply of goods and the demand for goods. The supply of goods will be related with production function. So supply of goods and production function, and demand for goods will be related with consumption function. So consumption is basically the demand for goods. Demand for goods and consumption function. First of all, यहाँ consider करना देखिए. When you say production, that is Y, is a function of, it is basically a function of capital and labor. Y is a function of capital and labor. This Solow model is based upon diminishing return to individual factor and it is based upon constant returns to scale. दोनों में फर्क क्लियर हो रहा है? Diminishing return to one factor, it means if you keep capital constant and increase labor, then output will increase at decreasing rate. But if I change capital and labor both, then output will change in the same at the same rate. So constant returns to scale means you have to change both the factor, or rather all the factor, then output will change in the same proportion. And diminishing return to individual factor means change only one factor keeping other constant, then output will increase but at a decreasing rate. So it is based upon constant returns to scale, which means if you increase capital and labor by certain proportion, then output will also change in the same proportion. So if I change capital by T times, labor also by T times, then this output will also increase by T times. Constant returns to scale. Then if I consider this T as 1 by L, assume that T is a positive number which is equal to 1 by L. So in place of that T you will write what? 1 by L. So left side will become Y by L. So left side is Y by L is a function of what? इस T की जगह 1 by L लिखना है. So it will become K by L और यहाँ 1 by L लिख दिया, वो 1 constant number हो गया. Now this Y by L you will denote it by small y, and what you will read it? Y is GDP divided by labor force, consider it as population, then it is GDP per capita. GDP can be referred as output, output per capita भी कह सकते हैं, GDP per person भी कह सकते हैं. So that GDP per capita is a function of what? What is K by L? Capital per capita. So that capital per capita is denoted by small k. 1 was constant number, ignored there in that function. So Y is a function of K. Y is basically a function of K. So production is basically a function of K. Output is a function of K, which means when K will change, then output will change, but it will change at a decreasing rate, because if you change only capital, then only capital means there is only one factor of production. So in that condition output will increase, but it will increase at a decreasing rate. So in this supply side, when you plot production function, here writing Y and here writing K, then production is a function of K, but it will increase at decreasing rate. So this is your production function Y as a function of K. So this is your one side of the model, but only supply side does not determine the output. The output will be determined by supply and demand both. Now in the demand side, इस फैक्टर पहले कंसिडर कर लेंगे, फिर लिख दीजिएगा. In macro you also write that output is equal to aggregate demand, Y is equal to AD also, that is the demand side of the model. In a two sector model, demand is made by either household or it is made by firms, ignoring government. If there will be government, then it is C plus I plus G. If the economy is open, then it is C plus I plus G plus export minus import. So consider it as a basic model. Y is equal to C plus I. Now we have converted the supply side into per worker by dividing it by labor force. So logically you will convert that demand side also into per. So how to convert it? Divided by labor. So Y by L is small y, C by L small c, and that small c is consumption per worker, and I by L is small I, which is investment per worker. So you have converted that function into this form, Y is equal to C plus I. So in the demand side you say that output or income is equal to consumption plus investment. Now one more thing, how much is consumed and how much is saved? Remember, part of your income you spent on consumption and part of it you save. So if I say a fraction S has been saved, then the remaining fraction 1 minus S will be spent on consumption. So consumption per worker, when you explain that consumption per worker, remember, out of that income we consume and we save. So if saving is equal to a fraction of income which is saved, that means this small s is what? Let us say saving rate 20%, so it is 0.2 into that y, that will be your saving amount. And how much is consumption then? A remaining fraction 1 minus s into y. Income is either spent on consumption or it is saved. So if I write here C, what you will write in place of that C? C is this consumption, and how much is consumption? 1 minus s into y. So in place of that C, what you will write? In place of that C you write 1 minus s into y plus investment. Now if I expand it, it is y minus small s y plus I. Y cancel out. So it is small s y is equal to y. What does that mean? What is this small s into y? Saving है, saving per worker हो गया, which is equal to what? So in a two sector model, at equilibrium saving must be equal to investment. Saving must be equal to investment in a two sector model. So saving per worker is equal to investment per worker. Clear है यहाँ तक? And what is this y? This y is this. Remember, y is a function of what? Y is a function of capital है. Y is basically a function of capital. So if I draw the demand side graph, then what will be the demand side diagram? The demand side diagram will be that if you draw this line as income line, y as a function of k, ठीक है, वो डायग्राम वही है जो यहाँ बनाया रखा. If I say draw saving line, then where will be that saving line? Saving is smallest into y. So you have drawn that function. Income की line तो आपने बना रखी है. Multiply that income by saving rate, so it will get translate downward. So the saving line will be small s into y. What does this gap represent? The gap of income and saving. So income minus saving is what? Consumption. So that gap is basically consumption per worker graphically. So we have basically two tools. One is the supply side, other is the demand side, and by using both tool we have to explain the steady state model, steady state capital, steady state stock of capital in the Solow model. So one side is the supply side, other side is the demand side model. So explain supply side part and the demand side part first. Briefly content लिख देंगे. Remember, we have to, one question will be on Solow model, it is not necessary to elaborate these parts. These are the tools which will be used to explain the model. So in the answer there is no need to explain that tool because you are constrained by the word limit. So if you have to write answer for 150 words or 200 words, then you have to mainly focus on the main aspect. These are basically the tools to understand that model. So basically this first is aggregate production function and it is being converted into per worker production function. This is aggregate output, this is GDP per capita, this is aggregate stock of capital, this is capital per capita. Write on first paragraph. Supply of goods in Solow model. Supply of goods in Solow model. Supply of goods in Solow model is based on. Supply of goods in Solow model is based on production function. Is based on production function. Which states that output depends on capital stock and labor force. Output depends on capital stock and labor force. Capital stock and labor force. Equation लिख देंगे वहाँ पे. Write that equation. Y as a function of k comma l. Capital Y a function of capital K and capital L. Below that, in terms of per worker, it implies that in terms of per worker it implies that output per worker small y output per worker is a function of capital per worker is a function of capital per worker is a function of capital per worker. First up, since Solow model is based on assumption of constant returns to scale. Based on assumption of constant returns to scale. Therefore, we can write following equation. In that following equation you can copy this. Ty as a function of tk comma tl, or assuming t as 1 by l, small y as a function of small k. ये दोबारा यहाँ लिख दीजिए. Due to diminishing returns to capital, production function gets flatter due to diminishing returns to capital. Production function gets flatter. Production function gets flatter. मतलब जो आप function we have drawn, the slope of that function gets reduced. So in that way it gets flatter, implying what? Marginal productivity of capital is declining because slope of that function is marginal product. So marginal product is diminishing, implying that slope is declining. Next paragraph. In the basic Solow model, demand for goods comes from consumption and investment. It means that output per worker is divided. Output per worker is divided between consumption per worker and investment per worker. Output per worker is divided between consumption per worker and investment per worker. ये इक्वेशन लिखिए. Small y equal to small c plus small I. Small y equal to small c plus small I. Below that, the model assumes that economies save a constant fraction of income. Economies save a constant fraction of income and consume the remaining fraction. Economies save a constant fraction of income and consume the remaining fraction. Therefore, consumption function can be expressed as consumption ये सी है. Consumption function is expressed as 1 minus s into y. Consumption function is expressed as c equal to 1 minus s into y. System. Substituting this in the earlier equation we get, substituting this consumption function in earlier equation we get after that ये last 10 step we get y equal to, in place of that c substitute function plus I, and then after solving smallest y equal to I, these three steps. And below that, just draw this diagram by writing here capital and writing here y. So basically these are the tools, and by using these tools we have to explain the basic model. Now make the next subheading in the sense growth in capital stock. After drawing that diagram, growth in capital stock, or steady state level of capital, steady state level of capital, growth in capital stock or steady state level of capital. Now consider this: at any given point of time there will be a given stock of capital, but that small k is capital K upon L. So suppose stock of capital in the year 2018. So this will be the stock of capital for the year 2018, labor force for the year 2018. So there is a stock of capital in the year 2018. I am concerned in knowing what will be the stock of capital at the end of 2019. So what will be the stock of capital in the 2019? Why it will change? It will change due to change in either this capital or due to change in labor. But in the first model we are assuming labor as fixed, technology is also fixed. So if labor is fixed and technology is fixed, then labor force of 2018 and labor force of 2019 will remain same. उसमें कोई change. So denominator is not changing. Now if denominator is not changing, the change will be only due to change in that numerator, that capital. That capital will decrease, and that capital will decrease because of depreciation. So if I say that 10% is depreciation and this stock of capital is 400, then the amount of depreciation will be 10% of that 400. So it will reduce by 10% into that stock of capital. Delta is depreciation rate. So depreciation will reduce the stock, and when stock will increase, stock of capital will increase only when you buy more capital, only when you buy more machinery, and purchase of more machinery is nothing but investment. So the stock of machine will increase because of, so it is increasing because of investment. It is increasing because of investment, and investment is always equal to what? Saving. And saving is equal to what? Saving is a fraction of income, small sy, and y is a function of k. So you can say it is small sy, or you can also say it is y is a function of k also. So investment is equal to this number. Now if you have to find the change in stock, change in capital, so change in capital is determined by what? How much is the net change here? That depends upon how much is investment and how much is depreciation. Depreciation reduces it, investment increases it. So change in capital is equal to what? Investment minus depreciation. Change in capital is delta K. Investment is small sy, and y is a function of k, and depreciation is delta K. ठीक है? Now if investment is more and depreciation is less, then stock of capital will increase. If depreciation is more and investment is less, then stock of capital will reduce. And if both are equal, then the stock will remain constant. Constant means the stock will remain steady. So if you refer steady state, at steady state what will happen? At steady state investment must be equal to, so you will simply say that at steady state change in capital will be 0, because the stock of capital will remain constant. So delta K equal to 0, which means small s function of K minus delta K equal to 0. Whenever you equate it with 0, you get a specific value of capital, which is called steady state stock of capital. And for determining that steady state, mark star here. So when you write K star, it means it is that stock which is steady. All stock are not steadies. One stock will be steady where investment is equal to depreciation. So you can simply, after calculating it, you can simply either, if you can shift to the right, then small s function of K star is equal to delta K star. ठीक है, and small s upon delta is equal to what? K star upon function of K star. Small s upon delta is equal to K star upon function of K star. So at steady state this condition will be satisfied. At steady state this condition will be satisfied. Now if you plot it graphically, then graphically what can be said? If I write here stock of capital, you have to draw investment line and you have to draw depreciation line. So what will be the depreciation line and what will be the investment line? Depreciation is at a constant rate, so you can draw that depreciation line straight starting from origin. That is your delta into K. And what is the investment line? Investment is nothing but saving. So what will be the saving line? Saving line was that small s y, and y was a function of K, and when they are equal, their equality will determine the steady state. Their equality will determine the steady state. But if I say economy is at a steady state, so when economy is at a steady state, remember, at a steady state, what does it imply? Economy is at a steady state, it means it is a long run equilibrium. And if economy is at a steady state, that means stock of capital for the period 2018 and the stock of capital for the period 2019, stock of capital for the period 2020, all will remain constant, same number hoga wo. If economy is at a steady state, then in each year the stock of capital will remain constant. Now if K is constant, what is the value of Y then? Y is a function of K, but if K is not changing, then Y will also not change. So the stock of output per worker in each year will also remain constant. But if output every year remains constant, then how much is the growth? Zero. If GDP per capita in each year remains constant, then there is no growth in the economy. So simply remember, at a steady state there is no growth. At a steady state there is no growth. But remember, we have kept two important factor constant. One is the labor force, other is technology. In the initial model, technology and labor force is assumed to remain constant. We are changing only stock of capital here. So at a steady state there is no economic growth. If stock of capital is less, then what will happen? If stock of capital is less than steady state, then remember, at any stock less than steady state, depreciation will be less and investment will be more. So when depreciation is less, investment is more, stock of capital will increase. So if a stock of capital is less than steady state, in the subsequent year it will increase. If it is more than steady state, then in the subsequent year it will reduce. So it will continue to change. It will continue to change so that economy attains the steady state, and therefore steady state is nothing but long run equilibrium of economy. It is that equilibrium towards which economy always continue to move. So steady state is nothing but long run equilibrium of economy. So we are basically referring to that steady state. So remember, at steady state there is no growth, but we are here to explain growth. We are studying Solow model to explain growth, but so far there is no growth. But there is no growth because labor force is assumed to remain constant, and technology is also assumed to remain constant. So technology and labor force is the main reason behind economic growth rate. So that will be added till this part. Yeah, at any given point of time, at any given point of time, at any given point of time, capital stock is, at any given point of time, capital stock is an important factor. Capital stock is an important factor that determines, capital stock is an important factor that determines output of an economy, that determines output of an economy. But capital stock can change over time. But capital stock can change over time. Capital stock can change over time, and those changes can lead to economic growth. And those changes can lead to economic growth. In particular, two forces influence capital stock. Two forces influence capital stock. That is investment and depreciation. That is investment and depreciation. Investment refers to expenditure on new plant and machinery, and it causes capital stock to rise. On the other hand, depreciation refers to wearing out of old capital. Normal wear and tear is depreciation. Wearing out of old capital, and it causes capital stock to fall. Therefore, change in capital stock is determined by difference between investment and depreciation. Next paragraph. At steady state, there is no change in, at a steady state there is no change in capital stock. At a steady state there is no change in capital stock. There is no change in capital stock because investment is exactly equal to depreciation. Investment is exactly equal to depreciation. So at a steady state, ये क्वेश्चन रख देगा. At steady state, delta k equal to 0. In place of delta k it is investment minus depreciation. Simplify करके. At steady state ये term. So if you know the saving rate, if you know the depreciation rate, you can always calculate steady state also. K star can be calculated numerically as well. What is the utility of steady state? Concept का significance क्या है? Steady state determine what? Long run equilibrium of the economy, towards which economy tends to move always. So add one paragraph below that. Steady state is significant because it represent long run equilibrium of economy. It represent long run equilibrium of economy. Long run equilibrium of economy. Underline that. Represent long run equilibrium of economy. It shows that regardless of the level of capital, with which economy begins, regardless of the level of capital with which economy begins, it ends up with steady state level of capital. It ends with steady state level of capital. Ends up with steady state level of capital. So whether economy begin with less capital or it begin with more capital, it will always end at steady state level of capital. So this is your basic part of that is Solow model. But remember, at steady state so far there is no growth की अभी कोई बात नहीं हुई है. Now make a technical note. If it may be asked to calculate in that technical note, you can solve one numerical problem. Again I repeat, whenever you write technical note, it is not mandatory because the nature of question is not numerical, but just for information. Suppose if aggregate production function is given as y is equal to capital to the power 0.5, labor to the power 0.5. This is capital Y, capital K, capital L. And a saving rate, that is small s, is 30%, 0.3. Depreciation rate, that is delta is 10%, 0.1. We have to find the steady state value of capital per worker, मतलब small k की value, output per worker at a steady state. Information given is aggregate and we have to calculate what? Per worker. So in order to solve, first write that production function to make it or convert it in terms of per worker, divided by labor, y by L, k to the power 0.5, L to the power 0.5 divided by L. This y by L is small y, and what will be this term? K to the power 0.5 है, L to the power 0.5 upon L है, so L to the power minus, so it can be written as capital K upon L to the power 0.5. So small y is equal to small k to the power 0.5, which is nothing but under root k. So you have converted that function into this form. This is your one requirement. After that, simply say at steady state. At steady state, change in that capital will be equal to 0. And change in capital was equal to investment, which was equal to saving, minus depreciation, equal to 0. And that was small s upon delta is equal to k star upon function of k star. Now you know saving rate, you know depreciation rate. Saving rate is given, depreciation rate is given. So left side is 0.3 upon 0.1. You have to calculate steady state value k star, and in place of that function, what you will write? Function is this, under root k. So what will be the function? Y is under root k, so here write down under root k star, and then solve it for k star. ठीक है, ये लिखने के बाद सॉल्व इट फॉर के स्टार, देयरफॉर के स्टार इज इक्वल टू, ठीक है, स्क्वायर कर लीजिएगा, रूट हट जाएगा वहाँ से 9, ठीक है. सो द वैल्यू ऑफ के स्टार इज, स्क्वायर कर लीजिए, इधर से रूट हट जाएगा, सो के स्टार इज 9. But if k star is 9, then what is y star? Y is under root k, so y star will be 3. No need to practice such question because the nature of question never asked in the IS पेपर. कॉर्नर मॉडल, बर्टन मॉडल, माइक्रो के कुछ न्यूमेरिकल रहते हैं, मैक्रो के न्यूमेरिकल या ग्रोथ मॉडल के न्यूमेरिकल नहीं है, बट सोलो मॉडल इज फ्रीक्वेंटली आस्क्ड. बट इफ यू आर अपेयरिंग फॉर इकोनॉमिक सर्विस, 1 or 2 क्वेश्चन प्रैक्टिस के लिए मालूम होना चाहिए, बिकॉज इन इकोनॉमिक सर्विस दे मे आस्क टू कैलकुलेट स्टेडी स्टेट वैल्यू, बट अदरवाइज इट इज नॉट रिक्वायर्ड. बट जस्ट यू नो द स्टेप हाउ टू अप्लाई दैट कंसेप्ट. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल कन्वर्ट दैट एग्रीगेट इनटू पर वर्कर एंड देन अप्लाई सिंपली दिस फॉर्मूला और स्टेप. Now the other important part in this growth model is that if there is a change in saving, what is the effect of change in saving rate? What is the effect of change in saving rate? Just say, consider first the point. Suppose depreciation rate is delta and currently saving rate is 20%. So if I say small as function of k, I am assuming a specific value of saving rate. Suppose saving rate is 20% and it is 20% in the year 2018. So economy is at a steady state here. Now question is, if saving rate increases, if in the next year saving rate increases and it increases from 20% to 30%, then what will be the impact on economy? If saving rate increases, then what is the effect? If saving rate increases, then this function will shift up. This function will shift up. As this function will shift up, now if stock of capital remains same, then at the same stock of capital, now you say that depreciation is less, investment is more. So when depreciation is less and investment is more, then stock of capital will increase. So stock of capital increases. Remember, as stock of capital increases, output will also increase, and growth in output is basically economic growth. But growth is a continuous process. So whether this capital will continue to increase forever? No, this capital will not continue to increase forever. As this capital will increase, economy will again attain a new steady state. Suppose economy attain that new steady state. Economy attain that new steady state in the year 2022. It took 3 years to attain the new steady state. So in that 3-year period there was growth. But what will happen after 2022? Again it will become same. That means after 2022 there will be no growth. That means growth was not sustained. So increase in saving rate will cause temporary growth but not the permanent growth. Increase in saving rate will cause temporary growth, but it will not cause the permanent or sustained growth in the long run. So saving rate is one important factor which affects growth, but it is basically causing the short run growth, not the permanent growth in the economy. In addition to that, same thing can be converted or it can be explained or understood in different contexts also. Suppose if I use the same diagram to say that 20% is saving rate in India and 30% is saving rate in China, referring to two different economies now. Keep all other factors constant. Then what does it mean? In India saving rate is 20%, so for India steady state value will be K star. In China saving rate is 30%, so for China steady state value is this. But India is at a steady state, China is also at a steady state, and we know that at a steady state there is no growth. So there is no growth in India, no growth in China. But can we say that their level of GDP is also same? No, the level of GDP is different. Level of GDP is different. So in which country level of GDP will be higher? The country having higher saving rate. The country having higher saving rate will be having a higher level of GDP. So that is why you say that saving rate also causes the level effect. It changes economy from one level to the another level. So in that way it is also causing the level effect. So saving rate change is causing some growth, but it is not causing the permanent growth. So that factor has to be explained first. An increase in saving rate, implies that amount of investment for any given capital stock amount of investment for any given capital stock is higher therefore it shifts saving function upward. Therefore it shifts saving function upward. As a result, at initial steady state, investment exceeds depreciation. At initial steady state, investment exceeds depreciation. Due to this, capital stock rises. And economy attains higher level of steady state. Solow model shows that saving rate is an important factor. Saving rate is an important factor that determine steady state capital stock. If saving rate is high, then economy will have large capital stock. And higher level of output. At steady state. Also, although higher saving rate leads to faster growth in Solow model. After comma, it is only temporary. Full stop. An increase in rate of saving increases growth only until economy reaches new steady state. Therefore, saving rate change, therefore saving rate change causes only temporary growth, causes only temporary growth and not permanent growth, and not permanent growth. Remember, whenever saving rate increases, this K will also increase, but as K increases, what is the effect on that capital output ratio? As K increases, capital will become more abundant, so marginal productivity of capital decreases. Therefore initially you have growth, but due to that diminishing return, growth eventually stops. It is not the permanent growth. Now can you compare this part with the Harrod-Domar model part? In the Harrod-Domar model and in the Solow model, if you compare Harrod-Domar, in that Harrod-Domar, what was the growth rate of GDP per capita? That was saving rate divided by capital output ratio minus depreciation and minus population growth rate also. In that model, if there is a saving rate, capital output ratio, depreciation rate and population growth rate, you will have a specific growth rate. If a saving rate increases, then growth rate increases. But what happens in the Solow model? In the Solow model, you say that if I use the same equation, when saving rate increases, it does not cause the permanent growth. It does not cause higher growth forever. It causes higher growth only for short period. So what is the main difference here between Harrod-Domar and the Solow model? In Solow model, the value of theta does not remain constant, but in this model the value of theta remains constant. So in the Harrod-Domar model, when saving rate increases, the theta remains same, so the entire value will increase, so we will have a higher growth rate. But in the Solow model, when saving rate increases, the stock of capital increases. As the stock of capital increases, the value of theta will also increase. So when the value of theta will also increase, then over a period of time the growth rate will remain constant. In Harrod-Domar model, value of theta was constant. Here the value of theta is not constant, it is based upon diminishing return, and here it was constant return. The value of theta was here constant. The value of theta is not constant in the Solow model. So in the Solow model, increase in saving rate will not cause higher growth forever, but in the Harrod-Domar model, increase in saving rate will cause higher growth forever. So that is the main difference between Harrod-Domar and Solow model. Write it in a note form. In Harrod-Domar model, increasing saving rate, in Harrod-Domar model, increase in saving rate causes increase in growth rate of economy, causes increase in growth rate of GDP per capita, causes increase in growth rate of GDP per capita, growth rate of GDP per capita, and that increase in growth is permanent. That increase in growth is permanent as capital output ratio was assumed to remain constant. Capital output ratio theta was assumed to remain constant in that model. was assumed to remain constant in that model. However, in Solow model, capital output ratio is not constant. In Solow model, capital output ratio is not constant. Capital output ratio is not constant. So, when saving rate increases, then stock of capital increases. After comma, which reduces marginal productivity of capital. And therefore value of capital output ratio increases. Value of capital output ratio increases. So as a result, there is no change in growth rate. In long run. If you go by the question from Solow model, almost every year there are 1 or 2 questions. You can read one question number 9. But वो content अभी explain नहीं किया, just wait. 9th was what is Solow residual. So the meaning of Solow residual is basically in that Solow model. And what is the implication of that Solow residual? Solow residual is nothing but technical growth rate. And why it is called the residual growth rate, and what will be the implication, that will be explained. But remember, when you explain that Solow model, in that Solow model you explain that output is a function of what? Capital and labor, and it was expressed as this function. So growth in GDP will be due to growth of technology, due to growth of capital, due to growth of labor. Now why it was called Solow residual? This technical progress growth rate is referred as Solow residual. Reason being, capital is something that we can see and calculate, we can quantify. Labor is measurable. Output of economy, GDP, that can also be calculated. But what we cannot see and observe is technical growth. So how to find technical growth rate? Suppose if I say that in India GDP growth rate is 7.5% and capital growth rate is 3%, labor force is going by 2%. So if capital has grown by 3%, labor has grown by 2%, then how come GDP is growing by 7.5%? It must be due to some other factor. So that other factor is what? The technical factor, the residual part. So how to calculate that residual part? From GDP growth rate we can subtract what? Contribution of capital and contribution of labor to get that residual. So that residual is being referred as Solow residual, but that will be explained in the technical progress topic. One question is, you can read question number 17, जो भी explain करेंगे पहले. Question number 17. Describe the growth path which once the economy attain it will give a higher level of per capita consumption than any other growth path for all the time. Describe the growth path which once economy attain it will give a higher level of per capita consumption than any other growth path for all the time. Now question does not mention anywhere Solow model, but it is very much part of that Solow model. We have, for all the time means what? We have to determine a steady state, but it will be that steady state where per capita consumption is higher as compared to any other steady state path. So per capita consumption higher means basically we have to now explain a specific category of steady state which is known as golden rule steady state. At golden rule steady state, per capita consumption is maximized. So per capita consumption is maximized according to the golden rule. So for this question 2016, in your register write heading golden rule level of capital. That will be answer of this question basically. Golden rule level of capital. Golden rule level of capital. Remember, this is also steady state, but it is that steady state where consumption per worker is maximized. So we have to find K star again, but as per the golden rule. So you can write here K star gold. Now just consider this technical part first, how to calculate that golden rule. The idea behind golden rule is that steady state will be considered as that steady state where the well-being of society is maximized. Well-being, welfare maximization है. Now GDP, that is output per worker, is equal to consumption per worker plus investment per worker. So this GDP can grow because of change in consumption also, because of change in investment also. If economy produces more machine, then also GDP will increase. If there will be more defense expenditure, then also GDP will increase. But our welfare depends upon what? What we consume. So it depends basically on our consumption. So golden rule steady state is that steady state where consumption per worker is maximized. So to calculate that consumption, y minus I किया. Since we have to calculate steady state, so I am writing here C star. Y is a function of K. Y is a function of K, and investment is equal to saving always. But we have to find a steady state. So at a steady state, investment is equal to what? At a steady state, investment is equal to depreciation. So if in place of that investment I substitute depreciation, that means I am assuming that investment is equal to what? So if investment is equal to depreciation, it must be a steady state then. So we have, if in place of investment you write depreciation, it means economy is automatically at steady state. So C is equal to this value. Now you have to calculate that value of K star where consumption per worker is maximized. So if mathematically I give you a function and you have to maximize this C, and you have to find C star maximizing value of K, then what you will do? Mathematically क्या करना है? Differentiate कर देंगे maximize करने के लिए, and first derivative equal to 0. But remember, when you differentiate this function, what you will get? This is production function. If you differentiate production function with respect to K, you will get marginal product of capital. Differentiation means change. So change in output due to change in capital is nothing but marginal product of capital. So differentiation of this function is marginal productivity of capital. And if you differentiate this function with k star, then this term क्या रह जाएगा? So mpk minus derivative of this will give you only delta. To maximize, you equate it to 0. Therefore golden rule steady state is that steady state where marginal productivity of capital is equal to depreciation rate. Golden rule level of capital is that level of capital where marginal product of capital is equal to depreciation rate. Just wait here. If you have to plot it graphically, so I write one line as a depreciation line, delta k, and the other line is this. Remember, this line is just y which is a function of k. So which term is consumption here? Consumption is y minus I. Y is function of k, investment is equal to depreciation. So consumption is difference of these two, and we have to maximize consumption. So where the gap has been maximized, so the gap will be maximized only at a particular level. This gap is consumption, so initially consumption will increase, it reaches maximum and then again it reduces. So consumption get maximized only at a specific level, so that value will be referred as k star. But in order to be steady, what is the need? Steady होने के लिए क्या चाहिए? In order to be a steady state, depreciation must be equal to investment. So where is that investment curve? Remember, this curve is production function, it is not saving line. So where will be the investment line? Below that. So if you are drawing that saving line below, you must pass it from the same point, then only then it will be a steady state. So you have to cross that saving line exactly from that point, which means you require a specific saving rate to attain a golden rule steady state. Remember, it is not necessary that this line will always pass through this point, but for golden rule it must pass through this point, which means, because if suppose saving rate is higher, then it will be passing from above. If it passes from above, suppose if it passes from above, then intersection will be here. That intersection will determine k star, but that will not be the golden rule k star, because golden rule is that level where consumption per worker has to be maximized. So from this what follows that if you draw that depreciation line, if you draw any saving line for one saving rate, this is one steady state. For another saving rate, another steady state. That means for different saving rate we have different steady state. So there can be many steady state, but there will be only one golden rule steady state. There will be only one golden rule steady state, and at that golden rule steady state, consumption per worker will be maximized. So in order to have golden rule steady state, we require a particular saving rate, but saving rate can be maybe more than that or it can be less than that. But for golden rule you require a particular rate of saving. So if economy is having that saving rate, economy is at golden rule steady state, then at that level of steady state consumption per worker is maximized, and it will remain higher as compared to any other steady state. So if a steady state is to the left of it or to the right of it, then also there will be consumption, but that consumption will not be maximized. वो consumption highest नहीं होगा फिर. So in that context, if you read this question again, question 17 जरा दोबारा पढ़िए. We have to describe the growth path which once economy attain it will give a higher level of per capita consumption than any other growth path for all the time. we have to explain the growth part which once economy attain it will give a higher level of per capita consumption than any other growth part for all the time. So obviously which steady state? The golden rule steady state. So once you attain the golden rule steady state, it will give a higher level of per capita consumption as compared to any other steady state. So in this part we have to explain that golden rule steady state consumption. Now you can draw this. नोट में टेक्निकल पार्ट लिख देंगे, बट रिमेंबर while writing answer you have to explain it more in words and less in terms of equation. Graph is okay, but you have to explain more in words, give more logic. What is the reason behind golden rule steady state, how and why equality of MPK and depreciation rate ensure that it is golden rule steady state value, and at that level consumption per worker is highest. So draw this diagram. Obviously at that point what will happen geometrically, that because condition for a steady golden rule is this, equate होना है. So depreciation rate is slope of this straight line and marginal productivity is slope of production function. So at the same level, if you want to calculate slope of that production function, then to calculate slope of it, because line is not straight, you draw a tangency there, and slope of that tangency will measure marginal product, but that tangency must be parallel to the depreciation line, implying same slope, because mathematically it must satisfy. Mathematically marginal product must be equal to depreciation rate, so slope of that tangency and slope of depreciation line must be parallel. Line must be parallel, implying same slope. Write down description. The steady state value of K.
सर डिप्रिसिएशन जरूरी नहीं है कि स्ट्रेट लाइन होगा, वो भी
नहीं, डिप्रिसिएशन स्ट्रेट लाइन होगा, बिकॉज डिप्रिसिएशन रेट इज कांस्टेंट. कांस्टेंट है, सो स्लोप मस्ट रिमेन सेम, एंड स्लोप इज सेम, इट मींस लाइन मस्ट बी स्ट्रेट.
सर लाइन अगर स्ट्रेट नहीं होगा तो
स्ट्रेट नहीं होने का मतलब है वी आर टेकिंग डिफरेंट डिप्रिसिएशन रेट एट डिफरेंट लेवल ऑफ कैपिटल. इफ यू डोंट टेक लाइन स्ट्रेट, इट मींस at different level of capital we are assuming different depreciation rate, but model assumes that depreciation rate is constant. The steady state value of capital per worker, the steady state value of capital per worker, the steady state value of capital per worker that maximizes capital per worker, small k, the steady state value of capital per worker that maximizes consumption per worker, that maximizes consumption per worker is called golden rule, is called golden rule level of capital, is called golden rule level of capital. Alternatively we can say that golden rule level of capital, golden rule level of capital, golden rule level of capital is that level of capital, is that level of capital where welfare or well-being is maximized. Welfare or well-being is maximized. Next paragraph. Consumption per worker is difference of output per worker and investment per worker. Output per worker and investment per worker. सिंबॉलिकली लिख देगा, स्मॉल c इक्वल टू स्मॉल y माइनस i, आउटपुट पर वर्कर माइनस इन्वेस्टमेंट पर वर्कर. Since we want to find steady state consumption, so we substitute steady state values for output and investment. Steady state values of output and investment. Since at steady state investment is equal to depreciation, so at steady state consumption per worker will be below that ये equation है. Consumption per worker will be C star equal to function minus depreciation. According to this equation, steady state consumption is what is left of steady state output. Steady state consumption is what is left of steady state output, after paying for steady state depreciation. So you are basically interpreting this C as what? Steady state output. Out of that steady state output subtracted what? Steady state depreciation. Then what is left over? That leftover is steady state consumption. With increase in capital stock, there will be two opposing effect. With increase in capital stock, there will be two opposing effect. With increase in capital stock, there will be two opposing effect. First understand this. if I say that capital stock increases, it will having two opposing effect. When stock of capital increases, what will be the effect on output? It will increase. But more output means more is available for consumption. But at the same time, more output also means that more will be depreciation. But more depreciation will reduce the consumption. So they are two opposing effect. One is increasing consumption, other is reducing consumption. So explain that part. On the one hand, more capital means more output. More capital means more output. And on the other, more capital also means that more output must be used. More output must be used to replace depreciated capital. To replace depreciated capital. Full stop. Therefore, consumption per worker is maximized. Consumption per worker is maximized when marginal product of capital is equal to depreciation rate. Marginal product of capital is equal to depreciation rate. MPK equal to delta. Marginal product of capital is equal to depreciation rate. Next paragraph. We must note that economy does not automatically attain golden rule level of capital. We must note that economy does not automatically attain golden rule level of capital. Underline that. Economy does not automatically attain golden rule level of capital. If we want any particular steady state, such as golden rule, then we need a particular saving rate. To support it. Underline this line also. If we want any particular steady state such as golden rule, then we need a particular saving rate to support it. Full stop. Once economy attains golden rule steady state, then it will have higher level of per capita consumption. It will have higher level of per capita consumption than any other growth path for all time. Any other growth path for all time. So when you have to explain question like this, basically the content you have written you have to explain as it is, और complete statement explain कर दीजिए जो अभी तक का लिखा है golden rule में. Because only at golden rule consumption per worker will be highest, but remember golden rule is not attained automatically. Golden rule will be attained only at a particular saving rate, and it is not necessary that economy will always having that saving rate automatically. So again in a technical note part, use the same function y as a function of capital labor, capital to the power 0.5, labor to the power 0.5. A rate of depreciation is given as again 0.1. Find a rate of saving. Find rate of saving so that consumption per worker get maximized. But consumption per worker maximize कब होना है? जब golden rule होना है. So what will be that rate of saving so that consumption per worker get maximized? So solution is now you have already converted that function. Y was equal to k to the power 0.5 L to the power 0.5 divided by labor. So small y was equal to small k to the power 0.5 or y was equal to under root k. Remember, for golden rule, marginal product of capital must be equal to what? A rate of depreciation. And how to get marginal product of capital? Rate of depreciation is given to you. Marginal product of capital is differentiation of this with respect to k. So if you differentiate root k with respect to k, 1 by 2 root k is equal to 0.1. ठीक है? So from that you can calculate what? Value of k star. K star की वैल्यू यहाँ से मिल जाएगी. But we have to calculate what? It will be that value of k where consumption per worker is maximized. But for that purpose, what must be the saving rate? You have to calculate that value. So k is how much? 25. Now it must be steady also. That k star 25 must be steady also. But at steady state, what is the requirement? At steady state, you say that change in capital must be equal to 0. For change in capital, you write saving function of k minus depreciation equal to 0, and then saving upon depreciation is equal to k star upon function of k star. And now you will write, you have to calculate rate of saving, it is unknown. Rate of depreciation is 0.1, and what is the value of k? Only when k is 25, then golden rule is satisfied. So here you will write what? 25 and below you will write what? Below is function, but function is under root k, so it will be under root 25, and from there you can calculate the rate of saving, 0.5. So when saving rate is 50%, then consumption per worker get maximized. So in notebook just one example होना चाहिए, in case if you are appearing for economy service it will be useful, otherwise for optional it is not required, but the question is given, उसकी frequency है, that means description is repeatedly been asked but numerical never asked. But so for golden rule saving rate must be equal to 0.5. Now one more part is generally being asked, that if suppose if saving rate is for golden rule saving rate required is 50%, but if economy has more than 50% saving rate, then obviously golden rule will not be attained. So to attain that golden rule saving rate will be reduced, and if saving rate is less than 50%, then to achieve that saving rate will have to be increased. So stock of capital could be more than what is required to have golden rule, or it could be less. So you may start with too much of capital, or you may start with too little capital. So too much will be the case when saving rate is higher, and too little when the saving rate will be lower. So you have to explain two part basically. ये complete हो जाएगा एक साथ. Start transition path. We have to explain that transition path. This is basically the third question. Again, in paper it has been asked, transition path. And we have to explain that transition path by taking two different cases. You can make A starting with too much of capital, starting with too much of capital, too much in the sense more than the golden rule. Make two diagram here. On right side diagram, on x-axis write time, because analysis is dynamic. Left side is one line is for depreciation, this is delta k, other is for function y as a function of k. So for golden rule what is required? The gap between production function and depreciation must be highest. So this is the stock of capital where consumption per worker get maximized, but economy is having too much of capital. That means in actually economy is having more than that. So more than that means deliberately you draw that saving line not passing through that point. So you are taking a higher saving rate. So if you take a higher saving rate, then this point will be the value of k star, but that is not golden rule k star. But this is a steady state, not golden rule steady state. For golden rule steady state it must be lower. But if economy is at a steady state, then if economy is at a steady base actually means that output per worker remain steady, consumption per worker remain steady, investment per worker remain steady. Steady means for all the period the value will remain same, whether it is for t period or t plus 1 period or t plus 2 period or t plus 3 period and so on. So suppose economy is at a steady state, and at this t0 point of time if there will be no change, then even after that it will remain the same value. But argument here is that during that period T naught, government policy has been able to reduce the saving rate so that we can attain what? Golden rule steady state. So now you have to explain what will be the transition path. So first of all, to achieve golden rule, saving rate has to be reduced. So but saving rate will be reduced, what will be the impact? आप इसका impact explain करेंगे. When saving rate will be reduced, then what will happen? When saving rate, remember at this point it was steady state. Being steady state means investment equal to depreciation. So at that point, you don't write, at that point remember investment was equal to depreciation. But when saving rate was reduced, reduction of saving rate will reduce what? Investment. So this investment get reduced, so inequality will be this. When investment get reduced, it will be less as compared to what? So what will be the effect on stock of capital? If depreciation is more, investment is less. So the impact will be that stock of capital will start declining. Stock of capital will decline. As stock of capital will decline, what is the effect on output? Y is a function of K. So then when K will reduce, Y will reduce. So remember, if there was an earlier output, now Y will start declining. Now question is, will it continue to decline forever? हमेशा कम होता रहेगा? जी नहीं. It will continue to decline till economy achieves the new steady state. After reaching that new steady state, again the value will become same. So it will reduce, but it will reduce only up to the new steady state. Then it will become again horizontal. Then onwards again it is steady. Question is, what is the path of this consumption and this investment line? When saving rate was reduced, what is the effect on consumption? When saving rate has been reduced, consumption will increase. So suddenly consumption will increase here. There will be a higher value. It will jump up. As saving has been reduced, investment get reduced. It will go down. Now determine, remember this up and down is basically because of that rate of saving change. But what will be the effect of decline in income? As income reduces, what is the effect on consumption? What is the actually consumption function? क्या लिखा हमने begin में start में? Consumption का function क्या लिखा था? That consumption was 1 minus S into Y. So remember, this consumption can change because of change in S or because of change in Y also. So this upward movement shift was because of change in S, and after that Y decreases. But as Y decreases, consumption will start declining. If consumption will start declining, then question is whether this will reduce and it will become equal to the earlier value, or lower than that, or higher than that. Consumption की value अब reduce होनी है. Now whether it will reduce and it will meet with the earlier value, that means it will become earlier, equal to the earlier level, or it will remain above, or it will go down. तीन values में से क्या possibility है? It will remain above because we are moving from one steady state which was not golden rule to another steady state which is golden rule, and at golden rule consumption per worker is maximized. So its value must be higher as compared to whatever be the earlier values. So this consumption will reduce, but it will always remain above the earlier level. So you have to keep that bold line above that dotted line. Consumption per worker must be higher, because you are moving from one steady state to another steady state which is golden rule, and at golden rule only consumption per worker is highest. So the value must be higher as compared to the earlier values. And what is the effect on this saving line, investment line? This decline was because of decline of saving rate, and further decline is because of decline of income. So when you explain transition path, basically you have to explain this form, how in different time period consumption path, investment path and income path will change. So basically this is consumption path. In 2014 or 13 this was the question for transition path explain करना, steady state, golden rule, transition path, ये सारे क्वेश्चन अब आ चुके हैं.
सर वो कंजम्पशन जो होगा इन्वेस्टमेंट के नीचे होगा ऊपर.
कंजम्पशन की वैल्यू, दिस वैल्यू will increase first then reduces but it will remain above this level. इस पॉइंट के ऊपर है ना.
कंजम्पशन को इन्वेस्टमेंट के नीचे होगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट को
नहीं. अच्छा ये कह रहे हो कि इन्वेस्टमेंट की वैल्यू ऊपर और कंजम्पशन की वैल्यू नीचे. लॉजिकल मतलब in most of the economy consumption component is higher as compared to the investment component. In some economy it may be, in some economy it may be. When you say y is equal to c plus I, suppose if I say in India y is equal, obviously in all economy y equal to c plus I plus g, but which component is largest? Indian economy is investment led economy or consumption led economy? Most of the economies are consumption led economies, and therefore you keep consumption line above, investment line below. But for any particular country it may be possible that investment is more and consumption is less. For small economies it may be possible. Right. Consider a case in which economy begins at a steady state. Economy begins at a steady state with more capital as compared to golden rule steady state. In that case government will try to reduce saving rate. In order to reduce capital stock. Suppose that government policy succeeds in reducing saving rate. At some point of time t naught. Government policy succeeds in reducing saving rate at some point of time t naught. It means saving rate decreases to the level. That leads to golden rule steady state. Next paragraph. The reduction in saving rate causes an immediate increase in consumption and decrease in investment, and decrease in investment. Immediate का मतलब ये upward movement है. Immediate increase in consumption and decrease in investment. Since investment and depreciation were equal, since investment and depreciation were equal in the initial steady state, since investment and depreciation were equal in initial steady state, so now investment will be less than depreciation. So now investment will be less than depreciation. Investment will be less than depreciation. It means economy is no longer in a steady state. It means economy is no longer in a steady state. Economy is no longer in a steady state. Next paragraph. Due to more depreciation, capital stock decreases. Due to more depreciation, capital stock decreases, and it reduces output, per worker. It reduces output per worker. As a result, consumption and investment also reduces. Consumption and investment also reduces as they are function of output. As they are function of output. These variables will continue to fall. These variables will continue to fall as economy reaches new steady state. As economy reaches new steady state, which is golden rule steady state. Therefore, consumption per worker must be higher. Consumption per worker must be higher as compared to what was before the change in saving rate. What was before the change in saving rate? After comma, although output and investment will be lower. Y की वैल्यू और इन्वेस्टमेंट की वैल्यू लोअर रहेगी, बट कंजम्पशन की वैल्यू ओरिजिनल वैल्यू से हाई रहेगी. सो व्हेन यू चेंज द सेविंग रेट ग्राफिकली, एक्चुअल में कहाँ से क्रॉस करना चाहिए वो? At that saving rate it was not golden rule. So to achieve that, when you reduce saving rate, it must be passing through this value. Only then you can say golden rule has been attained. Even if you don't draw that line, that will be enough, because you have to explain basically the process. So converse you can explain. If economy has this less of capital, तो less of capital में saving rate will be increase. So just heading बना लीजिएगा और ग्राफ ड्रॉ कर लेंगे लास्टली. B part and last part, and that is starting with too little capital. Starting with too little capital. Depreciation line and income line, y as a function of k. This is a golden rule level, k star gold. But economy is having less capital, so less capital means saving is very low, saving rate is very low, so you do not cross it with this point, rather before it. So this is the level of k star. So when economy steady state is this, but golden rule is this. So to achieve that golden rule, you have to increase saving rate. So again there is a original value of y, original value of c, and original value of I till that period t naught. If there will be no change, then all variables will continue to remain same in future period also. But in fact there was change in the t naught period. So now what will be the change? Saving rate क्या करना है? So when saving rate will increase, what will be the effect on C and what is the effect on I?
C नीचे I ऊपर जाएगा.
Saving rate increase होने का मतलब है consumption की वैल्यू कम हो जाएगी, इन्वेस्टमेंट की वैल्यू बढ़ जाएगी. That movement. But when saving rate will be increased, remember at this point investment was equal to depreciation. When you increase saving, increase in saving also imply that investment increases, and now it is greater than what? Depreciation. So what is the effect on stock of capital then? Stock of capital will now increase because of more investment. When stock of capital increases, what is the effect on output? Y as a function of k, so y will increase. So y will increase gradually till economy reaches the new steady state. Increase in output will again have effect on consumption and saving. So as income increases, consumption will increase. So earlier consumption has reduced, now consumption will increase. And the same question, earlier consumption has reduced, now consumption will increase. And when it will increase, it will become equal to the original value or more than the original value. It will be more than the original value because you are moving from one steady state to the other steady state, which is golden rule steady state. So it must be crossing that level. And what is the effect on saving? It will also increase. So the transition path is now this. Main part is only this consumption level. You have to be careful related to that. Other aspect is important, but not the focus will be on your consumption part. So when you increase saving rate, this saving line will passing through this point. फिर ये वाले जो रेट हो जाएगा, ये गोल्डन रूल का रेट हो जाएगा. हाँ, ट्रांजिशन है because dynamic है, in the sense it over a period of time which variable is increasing immediately, then after that. So basically that second diagram explains the dynamic aspect. ठीक है, just one paragraph लिख देना. When economy begins with when economy begins with less capital, when economy begins with less capital, as compared to golden rule, as compared to golden rule, then government must increase saving rate, then government must increase saving rate, government must increase saving rate to attain golden rule steady state, to attain golden rule steady state. Full stop. Increase in saving rate causes, increase in saving rate causes immediate decline in consumption, immediate decline in consumption, immediate decline in consumption and increase in investment, immediate decline in consumption and increase in investment. Since investment and depreciation were equal, since investment and depreciation were equal in the initial steady state, investment and depreciation were equal in the initial steady state, so now investment exceeds depreciation, so now investment exceeds depreciation. As a result, investment exceeds depreciation. As a result, stock of capital increases, stock of capital increases over time, stock of capital increases over time. With capital accumulation, stock of capital increases over time. Full stop. With capital accumulation, output, consumption and investment. With capital accumulation, output, consumption and investment gradually increases, gradually increases and eventually reaches new steady state, gradually increases and eventually reaches new steady state, eventually reaches new steady state. Since new steady state is golden rule steady state, since new steady state is golden rule steady state, new steady state is golden rule steady state, so consumption per worker, so consumption per worker, new steady state is golden rule steady state, so consumption per worker is higher than earlier value, so consumption per worker is higher than its earlier value, is higher than its earlier value. So basically in this class we have explained three important questions: steady state meaning, golden rule steady state and the transition path. But the model is not over. Reason, we have changed only capital, keeping labor and technology constant. So in the second step of this model we have to change labor, and the third step we have to change technology. After that there will be idea of convergence, conditional, unconditional. Solow model will continue tomorrow. ठीक है, कंटिन्यू रहेगा कल.
बहुत